So I'm sitting here again after another week in which it feels like the descent into various things is escalating. And it's hard to measure like how much of that is my own personal psyche because I'm feeling pretty good. Life's nice. Springtime's good. Family's great. Plenty of interesting work to do. I'm enjoying doing these podcasts a lot. Exercise, playing footy, eating well. And yet every time I tap into the zeitgeist, I feel like that things are accelerating and the direction that many important things are moving is not good. The reason I bring up how well I'm doing is not to brag, but just so often, you can project your internal state onto the world and then use it in a feedback loop where you see for example, if you're feeling bad or anxious, you can search for things that justify that feeling or that anxiety and then get into a feedback loop because there's always, as you know, in the big world, especially with the internet, there's always examples of literally every type of thing occurring that you can find to validate your emotional state. But I do feel like you can make a fairly objective case to observe why certain things are outliers and again, that they're kind of accelerating. I mean, I've obviously been looking at the Epstein files and writing that 50-50 line of being sure that there would be whole swathes of people who'd have to be arrested and that people would be crying out for that. And then simultaneously sure that nothing would happen because these people would be getting away with some horrible crimes and corruption for many years. And, I still am writing that line, but nothing has happened. I get the feeling that many of us perceive that there's been some action taken because Andrew lost his title and was briefly arrested, and Mandelson as well. But it's worth mentioning that neither of those two have been charged with anything yet. So it still kind of remains in a broadly zero category, especially with all the US politicians and billionaires and whatever. They've been untouched broadly. The Iran-Israel-US war is obviously escalating, and it's not obvious how that will end. If you go to my Patreon only episode last week, there's an assessment on why it's maybe a bit of an inescapable escalation trap that the Americans have fallen into with this one, in which things will probably continue to get much worse before they get better. And the movement of the AI takeover and its consequences is growing. A few big tech companies fired significant percentages of their workforce. People have started protesting in San Francisco outside of the companies saying that we should not pursue superintelligence. And the slowly sweeping, I guess, cognizance of what all of those changes will mean or are already meaning is going to keep growing exponentially until we're all concerned about it or at least aware about it. And so I wanted to kind of offer a little lily pad in the midst of all this because the natural response to this stuff may be to follow it even more closely and to despair about it, particularly about the things that deserve a moment of your despair and horror. But that classic Zen adage about worrying about the things that are in your control is, I suppose, only going to become more and more true as the things that are out of our control escalate into realms that are new for our lifetime in many instances, and then new for the species in other instances. And so, yes, again, wanted to offer a bit of a lily pad today, just to share some of my thinking in the hope that maybe that's interesting for you and useful in how you navigate and respond to all this stuff. But also, it's a little bit of a social exploration on what I think is likely to come as a response to all of this stuff, because ultimately the things that we like to do and the things that we enjoy are pretty constant and predictable. And as much as those things can be suppressed by dominant cultures or environmental settings or specific circumstances that we might find ourselves in, the onus is still on all of us to move towards those as much as possible. And I think holding those sort of guiding lights in these times is going to be not only just a salve, but potentially a collective response that may end up making all of life better for all of us. And given that can be the case, I hope it is the case. But more on that on the other side of the music. Before we get there, thanks so much to all my Patreon patrons. I'm putting up a poll of upcoming episodes. I'm keen to hear what you think. And an extra special shout out to Lucy Chalmers, who's joined on as a committed patron. Good to have you here, Lucy. This episode's for you. So I'm simultaneously juggling two interesting concerns at the moment. One of them is one that's been building up for me for many years. It's an ongoing source of frustration in my world, which is that I think most of the work that most of us do is kind of pointless, or at least very, very misaligned with what we would do with our time, given the free reign of opportunity that a beautiful natural world, a wealthy and productive society in the way that we have, and ostensibly liberal democratic society would offer. in that if I think about almost all of my friends, if I had just met them as a person and didn't know their work and was to build the ideal job for them, or not even job, but ideal week, almost none of them are spending their time in a way that is optimal for either them or for the society because their best talents are not shared. So consequently, the full value of what they have to offer isn't exploited or enjoyed. And that, I think that's mutually punishing. It's punishing for everybody, but it's of course can be punishing for them. I said my closest friends. That's only because they're the people that I know the best. Kind of anyone I know will be navigating some mix of this. And I get that life isn't perfect and we can't all do just whatever we want. And that's as a useful solution to things currently, but we could certainly be doing much better. And there's complex reasons for that I don't pretend to understand, but I do think about it a lot. So I have a handle on some of the elements. And it is my overall thesis, which is the topic of the book that I keep teasing and not finishing, that the way in which we perceive the world and strive to explain it and manage it has led to a kind of hierarchy of a type of control-based systems that are actually inevitably flawed and against reality. And so we keep building these hierarchies of insane things that don't make any sense in terms of the value that they provide. And the certainty that we pursue in navigating those as though they're the tool for improving life is robbing us of an awareness that there are other ways of thinking and being that can enhance our lives. Anyway, that's an enormous topic. Too big for a podcast episode, so hence the book. But why I bring it up is because we are likely, if it's not happening as I'm speaking, which it is, at a state where there'll be huge sweeping changes to how we are required to live our lives in terms of working and contributing to society and consuming and experiencing the world because of the AI disruption that's occurring. And many have called it overhyped and a bubble and all of these things. And, that could be the case. But even if everything stopped as it is today and we just waited for the even distribution of the technologies that we already have, it's very clear that you're not going to need whole swathes of people who are currently getting paid large amounts to do various things across the economy. And again, even if you didn't do any more development and advancements in robotics and you started to smoothly even out those things across society, it's pretty obvious that it's going to be a radically different world that we live in 10 years to the one that we live in today, which is crazy to say because it's already a radically different world today to the one that existed before YouTube and iPhones and everything else. So the two conflicting ideas. On the one hand, I'm sad about how many of us feel that we have to spend our time and I guess in many instances do have to spend our time. But also, I'm concerned about this sweeping change because when you do have mass disruptions, you can't always predict how they'll go, other than if things get particularly chaotic, you can pretty safely predict some return to the jungle stuff, not Lord of the Flies type, but more French Revolution. Here are the ideals, but they all get hijacked by the best maneuverers into power. And you just sort of replace your feckless, old, crusty power system with a new, dynamic, capable, meritocratic power system, which then encrustifies and cycle repeats. And, by the way, on the way to that, many people suffer greatly. And the tools for that type of suffering are obviously much worse now than they used to be, not only with the scale of weapons that we have, but also with the scale of agents of control and exercising of power. I'll talk about like the Palantir stuff, tech overreach, but also, yes, what we're increasingly seeing with autonomous lethal drones and that sort of stuff. And so there's just a lot of scenarios that you can imagine where things go badly. And it's kind of, I'm sorry to be so far into this episode and not be talking about the positive things yet, but I really think it's important to understand the context in which I'm having these thoughts and revelations, because what I keep seeing is that, okay, well, if we're in a world where we all lose our jobs suddenly and things get really dynamically bad, there are a lot of ways in which we can respond and engage that stuff individually and collectively. But actually, ultimately, the way to have a good time in life doesn't really change at all. And I think it's really important to keep that perspective at the center of decision making and planning and just even ideation of the future, because there are going to be so many new styles of experiences and thinking and ideologies and religious movements and charismatic leaders and whatever else that are impossible to specifically predict from here. But on the other side or beneath or through all of that noise, it's probably going to be more important than ever to retain the signal of what it is that you find to be satisfying about life and to move more towards that. So actually, it reminds me of my good friend, Nick Deladovic, with whom I do the Rank Ideas podcast. Go have a listen to that if you're looking for something to listen to. That isn't this. It's great. We go through all of the ideas in human society and rank them on a list. When he started working as a personal trainer, sorry, Nick, if I'm butchering the story, but his mentor or first employer said, look, Nick, you can make a lot of money doing this work. And he's like, oh, great. No, 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 wait. You can make a lot of money doing this work. Or, and he laid the groundwork for how Nick has structured their life, which is to um, be able to make money in specific ways in spurts and then control time to have a life full of the other things that Nick loves, which is creating artworks, writing, cycling around, eating a lot of food, and hanging out with friends and singing. And so I think similarly in this new wave of production and productivity and opportunities and dynamism and distress and upheavals and whatever, that there will be many ideas flying from all sides and many aggregate social community movements that may take you away from this, as there are now in our incredible wave of productivity for the last century. But ultimately, things that stand as sources of meaning in life and satisfying ways to spend time will be as they have been for tens of thousands of years. And in some ways, we're going to be more enabled to access them than ever, which is really exciting. But in others, there'll be more and more obfuscation and cheap traps and simulacra that run the risk of exacerbating what we're seeing now, which is the trend to sip for the sugar high of a kind of instant substitute that replaces the investment of time and elevation in priority of having lasting, meaningful engagements in life. I don't want to bash you over the head with this because it's something that you can find everywhere and something that a lot of people talk about all the time. There's all the studies on happiness and what have you. But I think maybe more usefully than just sort of listing out the known things that, scientific studies continuously show a source of happiness and whatever, I think maybe I'll just share my own thinking of the future in the hope that because that represents some skin in the game, it's at least a legitimate representation of one way of navigating the wave. So to start off, one of the major obvious things that's happened in the last 20 years that's getting worse, and you can point to evidence of this in any number of studies or trends, but people are spending less time with each other and are in aggregate further and further away from each other in kind of every way. And that's an impoverishment that we don't have to have. It's not true for everyone, and it's not preordained that must be the case. There are just many, many strong pressures against the kind of closeness that used to be something that was a birthright that everybody would take for granted and no one would even question a mere century ago. And so I kind of want to do everything I can, which is more than I am doing, to return to that kind of state. And that state involves spending a lot of time with your family, spending a lot of time with your friends, and not just one type of itemized time where you're sort of sitting across from each other, having a coffee and a conversation, or you're not just having a regular phone catch up or whatever. I mean, those things are also great, but the kind of living life together where you're solving problems and experiencing new things and sharing the wholeness of the world that you have, that's something that is known to be really important. And there's a number of ways that could represent that, the long life studies, the consequences of loneliness being worse than smoking, the diagnosed mental disorders that are offset through friendship, the socioeconomic benefits of having present family. Like there's too many to name, and it would be, I think, zooming in too much to even pick some of the big ones. But it's very clear that the distance that we're having between each other, not just in family, but also in friendships, and not just in friendships, but also with strangers, comes with a lot of negative consequences that I don't want to bear. I don't want them to exist. I don't want to be in a society where they exist. And I'm trying to work all the time to find better ways of navigating reality so that I can offset the worst of what's become the trending mainstream of how people experience each other in the world. And so to share some of my thinking, I'm always toying with having intentional community setups, not in like a cult way, but as in like, hey, if anyone wants to move to a particular place, maybe a few of us could go. I had that in many ways in Canberra and really liked it, but I couldn't afford to stay there. And the people who did the types of things that I do couldn't afford to be there either. So that was a bit of a trap, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm kind of secretly working on a aggressive pitch to many of the people in my life to come up with some specific solutions to this, because, I'm in the chapter currently where I've got a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I want to be intentionally sharing that with the people that I want to share all of life with the most, and haven't exactly been able to nail that. But actually, already just living in Buddha is, sad to say for my non-Buddha listeners, exponentially better than it would have been back home, because the population density is much higher and the cultural norm of people having time off for kids is much stronger. And so there's a lot more pro-social activity and just incidental contact that makes the experience shared and less isolating and rewarding. But there are other things I'm trying to build in to to ensure that contact as well. I mean, like this podcast is something that I avoided doing for many years because I didn't like the idea of podcasts, because I didn't like the idea of the kind of parasocial engagements that they risk becoming. And I in an ideal world would much rather be walking around having this conversation 100 times with the people that listen each week. That's not quite fair because you normally get to present your thoughts on matters in such a format where you have a license to just go off. And it was only something I turned to once I was really kind of housebound with infants. But it is obviously something I'm really glad to be doing and grateful to share with you, as I say all the time. But even still, I miss the equivalent function for me, which was doing this type of thing in the past from stages where you're talking to people and interacting and you can see how they're doing. Like I really miss and consequently really appreciate any feedback that you give or conversations in comments and that sort of stuff. But yes, those things in the real world. I'm, walking the land when I can without headphones to pick up incidental conversations where they happen. I play Aussie rules football here, which if you haven't played sport, you might not know. One of the great things is you come together and do a specific thing. You end up encountering people that you wouldn't meet otherwise and coming together in a common realm across sort of all political lines or socioeconomic lines or whatever it might be. Yeah, that's one of the great things I love about sport. Also playing music, it's a way of connecting with other people and takes you out of your comfort zone and takes you into physical environments you might not otherwise be in, because those sorts of incidental contacts remind you of the different perspectives of the world. And they're really something that is kind of increasingly evaporating, but absolutely at our fingertips to pick up at any time. So that's one thing, but even despite that, I'm still dissatisfied by it, and I kind of want to intensify it by maybe moving into a small place. But it's something I haven't really lived in anywhere smaller than 500,000 people, so I don't really know how much I'll be able to enjoy that. But yeah, I guess I don't want to live life without testing it. Yeah, so if you're if you're one of my good friends and you're listening to this and you up for a wild adventure, kind of anywhere on the planet, preferably not too close to a war zone, hit me up, because this is the time to aggressively pursue this stuff, because I really think that it's going to become more and more important, particularly with reference to the next thing I'm about to say, which is the contact with the natural world. And it's something I've talked about in the podcast a lot before, but we don't navigate by the stars. You can live your whole life without knowing much about what the phases of the moon are and the parade of the seasons and all sorts of things that would have been at the very core of your life function for not only the hundreds of thousands of years of us as Homo sapiens, but every species and every instinct that we came from before that has been designed to appreciate and navigate and be attuned to these occurrences of the world that we are alarmingly divorced from now. And so the kind of deep soul satisfaction that comes from being in a completely dark night sky with no sounds but the bugs in a river or something, that's not going away. But the spaces for silence and the spaces for darkness are going away, but you can still find them. And I kind of personally want to move towards those as much as possible. Enjoying good food is something that kind of, I think, looks insane that it's gone. Not that we don't enjoy it, but that the gift that we have of being able to eat fresh food that's seasonal, that we grow ourselves with that satisfaction, is something that is only a total tiny minority of our experience of eating. I mean, it's probably more likely right now at this instant that there are more people biting into something that they've picked up quickly that's made 100% in a factory and has 7,000 ingredients, some of which are food. There'll be more people doing that in this instant than there will be eating a raw fruit or vegetable or eating a dish comprised of things that they've grown themselves. I mean, probably at a factor of 10,000 to 1. And the enjoyment gap between those two is vast. And you can safely say that no matter what happens in the next 10 years, it'll still be very satisfying to eat a peach off of your own tree or whatever. And that's something that I actively want to pursue and don't do enough of and love. Every time I engage with the world like that, it's so deeply satisfying. I should say much more satisfying than the kind of luxurious consumption-based ideas to which it is in the zeitgeist to aspire. Like, it would be much more meaningful and special to me to have an apricot tree from which I ate the apricots, and then there were so many that I got sick of them, so I jarred them and then I ate them in the winter with some pancakes, and then gave some jars to friends. Like, that is a kind of wealth that is, to me, 50 times more appealing than even something really cool like a family holiday to Fiji or a luxurious car or a super fancy outfit. Like, all those things are still cool, but they're just nowhere near as good as something that is kind of at hand and kind of, I mean, in a way, it's almost free. It's just about the decision of prioritizing it and moving towards it. So I want to consciously do that a bit more. I don't have infinite time, so I'm not going to get all of these explorations through exhaustively. But I really am aspiring to and struggling to reclaim a kind of silence and boredom that is the only platform from which you can really deeply enjoy some slow moving things. And it's so like generic and tired and spoilt to say this, but to put the phone down for a day and just navigate some things. Like the other day, I was in a hurry to leave to go to football training. I left my phone at home. And I had to navigate all the way across town to a place that I don't really know how to get to. It's an hour away by public transport. And it was a tram, an underground train, and a trolley bus to get there. And I also didn't have any money because my phone is my my bank card. And just that hour of navigating was so much more stimulating and enjoyable than kind of any equivalent hour of being out of the house on my own in that week. Because I immediately ran into some friends on the tram. They gave me some money. I couldn't use the cash to buy tickets because there's no such facilities anymore. So I had to talk my way onto a bus and look at the physical timetable at the stop to see that I was going the right way and hope that it was correct. And it was just, this is a boring story, but it was all so much more stimulating than the routine sort of gliding of convenience that we do. And so I want to consciously build in the kind of routine challenges, or at least some intentional substitute for all the ones that I think we just don't realize how much that we've lost as things casually become easier to do. But the main one is the cognition, because being bored and looking around on that tram was so much more interesting than looking at the most stimulating content on my phone would have been. And I'm 40 now, and I haven't read any Virginia Woolf, or I know Napoleon wrote an account of Caesar's campaigns, and I haven't read that because my time for reading is so squeezed because I spend so much time with another type of reading, which has its own benefits, of course. But the style of that communication is so obviously controlled by market factors in a way that are designed for the individual consumer to engage in a certain way that has nothing to do with the benefit of that consumer other than the continuation of their usage. But also at the same time, I noticed that if I just put down my phone, then in certain environments, then I don't immediately pick up something that's good or more productive. I just become stressed about my environment. So then the lesson and opportunity is to take that information and correct the environment. So just doing a better job of intentionally cultivating that space for silence and boredom, not because those things are intrinsically amazing. They're pretty good, I think, but also what they allow for and provide for. It's kind of available wealth that's lost to us. And it's precious to talk about because I have no one to blame for those occurrences but myself, but I think I could do a much better job of pursuing them. And lastly, the satisfaction of learning and teaching. Much as in the same way with that example of being bored on the train, I had to learn how to navigate it. There are lots of structured ways in which we kind of don't have to do any learning to be able to access stuff now, especially with the LLMs coming in and solving problems for us. Like, that's great if you don't want to have to learn, what type of light bulb you need to get from the store to repair your lamp or whatever. But once you add in the 10,000s of things that you no longer have to solve, I think it does risk building a life that is less satisfying because, once again, as with the taking stuff for nature, we are built for walking around and solving problems in groups. And so, yes, to that end, I think I want to consciously have some choices around specific skills to cultivate that are ones that I don't have to have and are probably pretty embarrassed to have missed. There's kind of no depth, obviously, for all of us to the things that I can't do. But there's also, if I knew that I was on my deathbed tomorrow and I realized, not once did I spend a night outside lighting a fire for myself or something like that without a match, I would think that was a shame. And there's inevitably a long list of such skills. And so I want to do a bit more conscious cultivating of that, and also the sharing of them, because it's teaching that is the most satisfying way to use skills in my experience. And again, in a world where we don't have that dynamism between us with fewer exchanges, and also everybody else in your neighborhood is able to solve problems without having to talk to you. I think there's something very special that is at risk of being lost if we don't intentionally cultivate it, but it is on hand. And so finding things that are possibly too boring to be automated, or things that have already been automated that I can intentionally reclaim. And I worry that this risks just all going to some sort of 19th century and earlier fetishization of lifestyle. I'm not interested in all the genuine deprivations and hardships that came from those and the limitations of knowledge that followed with that. So I don't want to fall down some cottagecore hole, but continue on that example of the apricot tree. An apricot is something I can procure with money right now, but it will be a fraction of the satisfaction as you would get from seeing the tree flower, enjoying the sun that goes on it, having endured a winter free of fresh apricots, and then being able to have buckets full that you pick with people that you love and to share them. That kind of specific example as just one thread in a tapestry of life of all the things that you get to do and consume and enjoy. That's something I really consciously want to work towards. And that's something that will continue to be deeply satisfying in life, even if we are ruled over by a cabal of corrupt sex offenders without any consequence or justice. And I guess this journey has just been my own, this conversation has been my own specific navigation and thinking around that stuff. There are a million more things I could say, but something that will become increasingly important, I think, as a way of being is a lesson that I took from a friend a long time ago who, when navigating to their home, would write a particular way. And it bothered me. Maybe the fifth time we did it, I said, why do you go this way? Because it's like 2 minutes longer. And she said, yeah, but I like it. And I thought, yeah, like, what's 2 minutes versus your enjoyment of something that you do every day? And this friend had an explicit framework for upvaluing the emotional framework with which you experience the world, which is something that culturally I didn't realize had been stomped onto me as something that was stupid or like a less effective way of navigating the world, to be reifying your feelings above quote unquote rational information. I remember them saying to me, they said, yeah, it's fine to have the right way of doing things, but your feelings and your emotional systems are ultimately the ones with which you use to navigate all of your life. And so your experience is important to put above that other stuff. And that's a lesson that kind of planted a seed that's only been growing since. But I guess I would want to impart that one onto you as you think about your own life in the future, to remember that there may be objective and constructive ways of solving problems or perceiving reality, but those are always going to be sublimated to your actual experience of things. So your emotional framework and your experiential reality is something to contend with and ultimately celebrate, as you put it, at the center for however it is that you want to imagine what your ideal future in life would be, and to take the ongoing iterations that circle you closer towards that goal. I feel like I'd be doing a disservice to reality as I understand it if I didn't at least give passing mention to the observed, shared, and known benefits of having a spiritual framework in navigating reality. It's something that I haven't really got any handle on for myself, let alone a good understanding of other people. So I don't really feel equipped to talk about it. Perhaps in a subsequent episode, I could at least have a crack of having an exploration of my own idealized perceptions of that and conscious works to make sense of it, but don't feel that's really in the domain of what I feel comfortable talking about today or have an understanding of. All of which is just to say that that's a known element of well-being and happiness, whatever that looks like for you, that is something that should similarly not be dismissed in how you perceive of building a kind of robust future in which you have the capacity to be centered around whatever values and joy you get in life and understanding of reality, because those things are going to be pushed against very hard. And there'll be lots, as I mentioned earlier, there'll be lots of easy to hand, probably poorly conceived substitutions for that coming up as well. And I guess if you don't have an understanding of your values in advance of them being tested, you become susceptible to inheriting those from others who might not have your interest in mind, just as much as if you go through the day without knowing how to make food for yourself. You're going to reach for a Coke or a coffee at 4 p.m. and that also may not be in your best interests. Or maybe. Don't let me tell you. Thanks for indulging me on this journey. I know it's a little bit of a break into greater abstraction after a run of more current events focused things. But for me, this is very much at the center of the discussions that I would like to see happening in the world. And so if you want to continue them, head into the comments or get in touch. And if you want to shape the future episodes, please head to patreon.com/Endry. Or if you just want to support the show, I would love to have you there. One more thanks to all of my patrons, and extra special welcome to Lucy Chalmers. I hope that you're having a great week out there, and I'll speak to you soon.